For privacy reasons, names and places have been changed. This story is inspired by true events.
On the night of July 15, 1993, 19-year-old camp counselor Jessica Martinez vanished without a trace from Camp Wildwood, a summer retreat nestled in the dense forests of New Hampshire's White Mountains. The college sophomore had been working her second summer at the camp when she disappeared during what should have been a routine evening after the campers had been put to bed. Despite an extensive investigation involving state police, the FBI, and hundreds of volunteers, no trace of Jessica was ever found. The case became one of New Hampshire's most perplexing missing person mysteries, leaving her family devastated and the camp community forever changed by the loss of one of their most beloved counselors. For 4 years, Jessica's disappearance remained unsolved, gradually fading from daily headlines but never from the minds of those who had known and loved her. Then, in August 1997, a former camper exploring the abandoned ruins of an old logging cabin deep in the forest made a discovery that would finally provide answers to questions that had haunted the camp for years. Hidden beneath rotting floorboards in the forgotten cabin, 16-year-old Sarah Thompson found a distinctive silver bracelet that would prove to be the first piece of evidence in Jessica's case since the night she disappeared. The bracelet would not only solve the mystery of Jessica's fate, but would also expose a truth that was far more sinister than anyone could have imagined. This is the complete investigation into Jessica Martinez's disappearance, from the peaceful summer camp where she vanished to the shocking revelation that would emerge from the ruins of a cabin that had been forgotten by time. Chapter 1: The Night Watch. July 15, 1993 was a typical summer evening at Camp Wildwood, located in the heart of New Hampshire's White Mountain National Forest. The day had been filled with the usual camp activities: swimming, hiking, arts and crafts, and campfire songs, and the 120 children between ages 8 and 16 had been settled into their cabins for the night. Jessica Martinez, 19, was a sophomore at the University of Vermont studying elementary education, and this was her second summer working as a counselor at Camp Wildwood. She was responsible for a cabin of 8 12-year-old girls and was known throughout the camp for her enthusiasm, creativity, and genuine care for the children in her charge. Camp Wildwood had been operating since 1947 and was considered one of New England's premier summer camps. The facility sprawled across 200 acres of pristine forest, featuring rustic cabins, a crystal-clear lake, dining halls, and recreational facilities that provided children with an authentic outdoor experience away from the distractions of modern life. Jessica had grown to love everything about Camp Wildwood: the smell of pine trees, the sound of loons on the lake, the laughter of children discovering the joys of nature for the first time. Her fellow counselors described her as the heart of the camp, someone who could turn any activity into an adventure and make every child feel special. On the evening of July 15th, Jessica had followed her usual routine of helping her campers prepare for bed, reading them a story, and ensuring they were settled for the night. The girls in her cabin, known as Birch Cabin, were particularly fond of Jessica and had requested an extra story before lights out. After her campers were asleep, Jessica had joined the other counselors in the main lodge around 9:30 p.m. for their nightly staff meeting. Camp Director Robert Walsh conducted these meetings to discuss the next day's activities, address any issues with campers, and ensure that all safety protocols were being followed. The staff meeting had been routine and positive, with Jessica contributing her usual insights about upcoming activities and sharing funny stories about her campers' adventures that day. Her fellow counselors later reported that she had seemed her normal, cheerful self with no signs of distress or unusual behavior. The meeting ended at approximately 10:15 p.m., and the counselors began dispersing to their own quarters or to conduct the final security checks of the evening. Camp policy required that 2 counselors make rounds through all cabin areas before midnight to ensure that all campers were safely in their beds. Jessica had volunteered to partner with fellow counselor Michael Thompson, 20, for the evening security rounds. The two had worked together frequently during the summer and had developed a comfortable routine for checking the cabin areas efficiently while maintaining the quiet atmosphere necessary for sleeping children. The security check began at 10:30 p.m. and involved visiting each of the 12 cabins to ensure that all campers were present and accounted for. Jessica and Michael worked systematically through the camp, checking off each cabin on their list as they confirmed that everyone was safe and secure. By 11:15 p.m., they had completed their rounds of 11 cabins and had only one remaining, Oak Cabin, which housed 8 14-year-old boys and was located at the far edge of the camp property, about a quarter-mile from the main lodge through a wooded trail. Michael later told investigators that Jessica had seemed completely normal during their rounds and had been looking forward to the camp's annual talent show that was scheduled for the following evening. She had been helping several of her campers prepare acts and was excited about their performances. When they reached Oak Cabin, Michael went inside to check on the boys while Jessica remained outside, as was their usual procedure to avoid waking the campers unnecessarily. Michael spent approximately 5 minutes inside the cabin, confirming that all 8 boys were present and sleeping peacefully. However, when Michael exited Oak Cabin at 11:22 p.m., Jessica was nowhere to be seen. Initially, he assumed she had walked a short distance away to use the restroom facilities or had stepped into the trees for privacy. He called her name quietly, not wanting to wake the nearby campers. When Jessica didn't respond after several minutes, Michael began to search the immediate area around Oak Cabin. He checked the restroom facilities, looked along the trail back toward the main lodge, and called her name more loudly, becoming increasingly concerned about her absence. At 11:35 p.m., Michael made the decision to return to the main lodge to report that Jessica was missing. He found Camp Director Walsh still in his office and explained that Jessica had vanished during their security rounds without any explanation or indication of where she might have gone. Walsh immediately contacted the other counselors and organized a search of the camp property. By midnight, 12 staff members were systematically checking every building, trail, and area where Jessica might have gone voluntarily or where she might have had an accident. The initial search revealed no trace of Jessica Martinez. Her personal belongings were still in her counselor quarters. There were no signs of struggle around Oak Cabin, and no one had seen or heard anything unusual during the time she had disappeared. At 12:45 a.m. on July 16th, Camp Director Walsh made the decision to contact the New Hampshire State Police. The disappearance of a staff member from a summer camp represented a serious emergency that required immediate professional intervention. By 1 a.m., the peaceful summer camp had been transformed into the center of a missing person investigation. Jessica Martinez, who had been so excited about the next day's talent show, had vanished into the New Hampshire wilderness without leaving any clues about what had happened during those crucial 7 minutes when she had been alone outside Oak Cabin. The search for Jessica was about to become one of the most intensive missing person investigations in New Hampshire history, involving hundreds of searchers combing through thousands of acres of dense forest in a desperate attempt to find the beloved camp counselor who had simply disappeared into the night. Chapter 2: The Search. The search for Jessica Martinez began immediately on the early morning hours of July 16, 1993, as the New Hampshire State Police recognized that the disappearance of a young woman from a remote camp location required urgent and extensive resources. Detective Lieutenant Sarah Mitchell arrived at Camp Wildwood at 2:30 a.m. to take charge of the investigation. With 18 years of experience in missing person cases, Mitchell understood that the first 24 hours would be critical in determining Jessica's fate, especially given the vast wilderness surrounding the camp. The investigation began with detailed interviews of all camp staff who had been present during the evening of July 15th. Mitchell focused particularly on Michael Thompson, who had been the last person to see Jessica, and Camp Director Robert Walsh, who was responsible for overall camp operations and security. The interviews revealed that Jessica had been her normal, enthusiastic self throughout the day and evening, showing no signs of distress, health problems, or conflicts with other staff members. Everyone described her as happy and committed to her work at the camp. Detective Mitchell also conducted a thorough examination of the area around Oak Cabin where Jessica had last been seen. The scene showed no signs of struggle, no footprints leading away from the area, and no personal items that might indicate what had happened during her disappearance. The New Hampshire State Police immediately requested assistance from specialized search and rescue teams throughout New England. By dawn on July 16th, over 100 volunteers had arrived at Camp Wildwood to begin systematic searching of the surrounding forest. The search area encompassed the entire 200-acre camp property and extended into the thousands of acres of White Mountain National Forest that surrounded the facility. The terrain was challenging, with dense woods, steep hills, rocky outcroppings, and numerous streams that could pose hazards to someone moving through the area at night. Search teams with tracking dogs arrived from Vermont and Maine to assist in the effort. The dogs were given items of Jessica's clothing to establish her scent, then taken to Oak Cabin to attempt to pick up her trail from the location where she was last seen. The The search dogs picked up Jessica's scent around Oak Cabin and followed it approximately 50 yards into the forest before losing the trail entirely. The abrupt end of the scent trail suggested that Jessica might have gotten into a vehicle or that her scent had been obscured by environmental factors. However, the location was over a quarter-mile from the nearest road accessible by vehicles, making it unlikely that Jessica could have reached a car without leaving more obvious evidence of her movement through the forest. The investigation began to consider other possibilities for her disappearance. The FBI joined the investigation on July 17, bringing federal resources and expertise in cases involving missing persons in remote areas. Special Agent David Kim was assigned to coordinate with state and local authorities and to analyze the possibility that Jessica had been abducted. Agent Kim's investigation focused on anyone who might have had access to the camp property or who could have been familiar with Jessica's routines and whereabouts. This included current and former camp employees, local residents, and anyone else who might have been in the area. The background investigation revealed that all current camp staff had clean records and had been thoroughly vetted before being hired. However, the camp had employed dozens of people over the years, and tracking down all former employees proved to be a massive undertaking. One person who attracted investigators' attention was David Sullivan, a 28-year-old former camp counselor who had worked at Camp Wildwood during the summer of 1991. Sullivan had been dismissed mid-season due to complaints about inappropriate behavior with female staff members. When investigators attempted to locate Sullivan for questioning, they discovered that he had moved to California shortly after leaving the camp and had provided a false forwarding address. This made him a person of interest in Jessica's disappearance. Meanwhile, the physical search of the forest continued to expand, with teams covering an area of over 50 square miles around Camp Wildwood. Helicopter crews provided aerial reconnaissance, and specialized teams searched all water features where Jessica might have fallen or been placed. The search efforts were complicated by the dense forest canopy and challenging terrain that made it difficult to spot anything from the air. Ground teams had to systematically check every ravine, cave, and potential hiding spot where evidence might be concealed. The case received extensive media coverage throughout New England, with Jessica's photograph appearing on television news programs and in newspapers. The story of a young camp counselor disappearing from a children's summer camp captured public attention and generated numerous tips. However, most of the tips proved to be false leads or cases of mistaken identity. Several people reported seeing young women who resembled Jessica in various locations throughout New Hampshire and neighboring states, but investigation revealed that none of these sightings involved Jessica herself. One potentially significant tip came from a local resident who reported seeing suspicious activity near an old logging road about 3 miles from Camp Wildwood on the night of July 15. However, investigation of the area revealed no evidence connecting it to Jessica's disappearance. As July 1993 turned into August, Jessica had been missing for over 2 weeks without any confirmed sightings or physical evidence. The investigation had involved hundreds of law enforcement officers and volunteers but had produced no concrete leads about her whereabouts. The search area was gradually expanded to include communities throughout central New Hampshire, with investigators checking hotels, bus stations, and any location where Jessica might have gone voluntarily or been taken against her will. Camp Wildwood remained closed for the remainder of the 1993 summer season, with all campers having been sent home and their families notified about the situation. The disappearance of a counselor had fundamentally altered the camp's operation and raised serious questions about safety and security. The investigation continued into the fall of 1993, but with reduced intensity as the initial urgency gave way to the grim reality that Jessica might not be found quickly. Detective Mitchell continued to pursue leads and coordinate with other agencies, but the case was beginning to take on the characteristics of a long-term missing person investigation. For Jessica's family, the transition from active search to ongoing investigation was devastating. Her parents, Roberto and Carmen Martinez, traveled from their home in California to New Hampshire multiple times, participating in search efforts and pleading for information about their daughter's fate. The mystery of Jessica Martinez would haunt Camp Wildwood and the surrounding community for years, joining the ranks of missing person cases that seemed destined to remain forever unsolved. However, the answers to Jessica's disappearance were actually hidden much closer to the camp than anyone realized, waiting to be discovered in an abandoned cabin that held secrets from decades past. Chapter 3: Cold Case. The years following Jessica Martinez's disappearance were marked by persistent efforts from her family and periodic reviews by law enforcement, but the case gradually took on the characteristics of an unsolved mystery that seemed to defy explanation. Roberto and Carmen Martinez refused to accept that their daughter had simply vanished without a trace. They maintained regular contact with Detective Mitchell and other investigators, traveling from California to New Hampshire multiple times each year to participate in anniversary searches and awareness campaigns. The Martinez family also hired private investigator Margaret Walsh in 1994 to continue the search when it became clear that the official investigation had exhausted its immediate leads. Walsh brought fresh perspective to the case and had extensive contacts throughout the New England law enforcement community. Walsh's investigation focused on David Sullivan, the former camp counselor who had disappeared after being fired in 1991. Despite extensive efforts, Sullivan proved impossible to locate, as he had used false identification when moving to California and had successfully concealed his whereabouts. Camp Wildwood reopened for the 1994 summer season, but with significantly enhanced security measures and a subdued atmosphere that reflected the ongoing uncertainty about Jessica's fate. Many families chose not to send their children back, and the camp struggled to maintain enrollment. The case was featured on several television programs throughout the mid-1990s, including Unsolved Mysteries and America's Most Wanted, generating hundreds of tips from viewers across the country. However, most of these leads proved to be false sightings or cases of mistaken identity. One tip that seemed particularly credible came from a woman in Vermont who reported seeing a young woman matching Jessica's description hitchhiking along Interstate 91 in late July 1993. However, investigation revealed that the sighting had occurred before Jessica's disappearance and involved a different person entirely. Detective Mitchell continued to review Jessica's case file regularly, looking for connections to similar missing person cases or new investigative techniques that might provide fresh insights. She maintained communication with the FBI and participated in cold case task forces throughout New England. In 1996, 3 years after Jessica's disappearance, Detective Mitchell organized a comprehensive re-examination of the Camp Wildwood property and surrounding forest areas. New search techniques and equipment had become available, and she hoped that previously overlooked evidence might be discovered. The 1996 search focused particularly on areas of the forest that had been difficult to access during the original investigation. Teams used ground-penetrating radar and advanced metal detection equipment to examine locations where evidence might be buried or concealed. However, the expanded search produced no new evidence related to Jessica's disappearance. The investigation seemed to have reached a dead end, with all viable leads exhausted and no clear direction for further investigation. Meanwhile, former Camp Wildwood campers and counselors continued to remember Jessica and wonder about her fate. Many had been deeply affected by her disappearance and maintained contact with each other through informal networks that shared information about the case. One of these former campers was Sarah Thompson, who had been 12 years old during the summer of 1993 and had been in Jessica's cabin group. Sarah had idolized Jessica and had been devastated by her disappearance, carrying the memory of her beloved counselor throughout her teenage years. In 1997, Sarah was 16 years old and had developed into an avid hiker and outdoors enthusiast, partly inspired by her experiences at Camp Wildwood. She frequently explored the White Mountain region with friends and family, often hiking in areas near the former camp. During the summer of 1997, Sarah had been researching the history of the Camp Wildwood area for a school project about local logging operations. Her research had led her to discover that there were several abandoned logging camps scattered throughout the forest, remnants of the region's industrial past. These abandoned sites fascinated Sarah, who saw them as windows into New Hampshire's history and as locations that few modern visitors ever discovered. She began systematically exploring and documenting these forgotten places during her hiking expeditions. On August 14, 1997, Sarah was hiking with her younger brother Tom in an area approximately 3 miles northeast of the former Camp Wildwood property. They were following an old logging road that had been abandoned for decades and was barely visible through the forest growth. Sarah's research had indicated that there should be an old logging camp somewhere in this area, and she was determined to find it despite the challenging terrain and thick vegetation that had reclaimed much of the original clearing. After several hours of searching, Sarah and Tom discovered the remains of what had once been a small logging operation. The site included the foundations of several buildings and the ruins of a cabin that had partially collapsed but still retained much of its basic structure. The abandoned cabin was constructed of hand-hewn logs and appeared to date from the early 1900s, when logging operations had been active throughout the White Mountains. The roof had partially collapsed, but the walls remained largely intact, creating a shelter that could still provide protection from the elements. Sarah was fascinated by the historical significance of the site and decided to explore the cabin more thoroughly. She carefully entered the structure, taking photographs and documenting the construction techniques and artifacts that remained from the logging era. As Sarah examined the cabin's interior, she noticed that the floorboards in one corner had rotted away, revealing a small space beneath the floor where items might have been stored or hidden. Curious about what might be in this concealed area, she carefully moved aside some of the debris. Hidden beneath the rotting floorboards, Sarah found what appeared to be a piece of jewelry, a distinctive silver bracelet with turquoise stones that seemed out of place among the historical artifacts. The bracelet was tarnished but appeared to be of modern manufacture, unlike the 1900s-era items she had been finding. Sarah immediately recognized that the bracelet seemed too contemporary to be from the logging era, and something about it triggered a memory from her time at Camp Wildwood. As she examined it more closely, she realized with growing excitement and dread that she had seen this exact bracelet before. The bracelet belonged to Jessica Martinez, and Sarah was certain of this because she remembered admiring it during the summer of 1993. Jessica had told the girls in her cabin that the bracelet was a gift from her grandmother and was one of her most treasured possessions. Sarah's discovery in the abandoned logging cabin would finally provide the breakthrough that investigators had been seeking for 4 years. However, it would also raise disturbing new questions about what had happened to Jessica and how her bracelet had ended up in such a remote and forgotten location. Chapter 4. The Forgotten Cabin. August 14, 1997 was the day that would finally break open the Jessica Martinez case. 16-year-old Sarah Thompson had been exploring the ruins of an abandoned logging cabin when she made a discovery that would provide the first concrete evidence in Jessica's disappearance since that night in 1993. The logging cabin was located approximately 3 miles northeast of Camp Wildwood, deep in a section of forest that was rarely visited by hikers or campers. The structure dated back to the early 1900s and had been abandoned when logging operations moved to other areas of the White Mountains. Sarah had been documenting the historical site when she discovered the silver bracelet with turquoise stones hidden beneath the rotted floorboards. The moment she saw it, she knew with absolute certainty that it belonged to Jessica Martinez, her beloved counselor from Camp Wildwood. Sarah's hands trembled as she carefully extracted the bracelet from its hiding place. The jewelry was tarnished and showed signs of having been exposed to moisture, but it was otherwise intact and clearly recognizable as the distinctive piece that Jessica had worn every day during the summer of 1993. Understanding the significance of her discovery, Sarah immediately stopped her exploration of the cabin and carefully preserved the bracelet without disturbing the area further. She used her camera to document the exact location where the bracelet had been found and the condition of the surrounding area. Sarah and her brother Tom hiked back to their car and drove directly to the nearest phone to contact the New Hampshire State Police. Sarah explained her discovery to the dispatcher and requested that Detective Mitchell be notified immediately about the potential breakthrough in Jessica's case. Detective Mitchell received the call at her home and immediately recognized the significance of Sarah's discovery. She arranged to meet Sarah at the State Police Barracks in Concord, where the bracelet could be properly examined and the discovery could be thoroughly documented. When Detective Mitchell examined the bracelet, she confirmed what Sarah had suspected. This was indeed Jessica's jewelry, as evidenced by photographs from the 1993 investigation and testimony from other camp counselors who remembered Jessica wearing it regularly. The discovery of Jessica's bracelet in the abandoned cabin immediately shifted the investigation's focus to this remote location. Detective Mitchell organized a comprehensive search of the cabin and surrounding area, bringing in forensic specialists and search teams to examine every inch of the site. The forensic examination of the cabin revealed additional evidence that Jessica had been at this location. In addition to the bracelet, investigators found strands of hair that matched Jessica's color and length, as well as fabric fibers that were consistent with the clothing she had been wearing when she disappeared. Most significantly, the search teams discovered human remains buried beneath the cabin's floor in an area adjacent to where the bracelet had been found. The remains were carefully excavated and transported to the state medical examiner's office for identification and analysis. The forensic examination confirmed that the remains belonged to Jessica Martinez, providing definitive answers about her fate after 4 years of uncertainty. The condition of the remains and the evidence at the scene indicated that Jessica had been killed shortly after her disappearance, and her body had been hidden in this remote location. The discovery of Jessica's body in the abandoned cabin immediately transformed the investigation from a missing person case into a homicide investigation. Detective Mitchell began analyzing who could have known about this remote location and who would have had the opportunity to transport Jessica there. The cabin's location was significant because it required extensive knowledge of the local forest to find, yet it was accessible by an old logging road that could accommodate a vehicle. This suggested that Jessica's killer was someone familiar with the area's history and geography. The investigation focused on anyone who might have had knowledge of the abandoned logging sites scattered throughout the White Mountains. This included local historians, longtime residents, former logging workers, and anyone else who might have explored these forgotten locations. One name that emerged from this investigation was Harold Peterson, a 45-year-old local handyman who had worked in the Camp Wildwood area for many years and was known to be interested in the region's logging history. Peterson had done maintenance work at the camp during the early 1990s. When investigators examined Peterson's background more thoroughly, they discovered that he had been fired from his position at Camp Wildwood in early 1993, just a few months before Jessica's disappearance. He had been dismissed for inappropriate behavior toward female staff members and for being found in areas of the camp where he wasn't supposed to be. Peterson's firing had been handled quietly by camp management, and he had not been considered a suspect during the original investigation because his dismissal had occurred several months before Jessica's disappearance. However, the new evidence suggested that he might have returned to the area with malicious intent. When investigators attempted to locate Peterson for questioning, they discovered that he had left New Hampshire shortly after Jessica's disappearance and had been living in various locations throughout New England. His movements had been erratic, and he had used several different addresses and employment situations. Peterson was finally located in Massachusetts, where he had been working as a maintenance supervisor at a small college. When approached by investigators, his behavior was nervous and evasive, and he initially denied any knowledge of Jessica's disappearance or the abandoned cabin. However, when confronted with evidence placing him in the area at the time of Jessica's disappearance and his detailed knowledge of local logging history, Peterson's story began to change. The investigation revealed that he had been angry about his dismissal from Camp Wildwood and had harbored resentment toward the camp and its staff. Peterson's final confession came after forensic evidence linked him to the crime scene at the abandoned cabin. Hair and fiber evidence connected him to the location, and his detailed knowledge of the site's location confirmed his involvement in Jessica's murder. According to Peterson's confession, he had been watching Camp Wildwood for months after his dismissal, waiting for an opportunity to get revenge against the camp that had embarrassed him. On the night of July 15, 1993, he had been hiding in the forest when he saw Jessica conducting her security rounds. Peterson had approached Jessica when she was alone outside Oak Cabin, claiming that he had information about suspicious activity in the forest. Jessica, being responsible and concerned about camp safety, had agreed to accompany him to investigate what he claimed to have seen. Peterson had led Jessica away from the camp toward the abandoned cabin, where he had attacked and killed her. He had buried her body beneath the cabin floor and had hidden her bracelet in what he thought was a secure location where it would never be found. The discovery of Jessica's bracelet by Sarah Thompson had finally exposed Peterson's crime and brought justice for a young woman whose only mistake had been trying to protect the children in her care. Chapter 5: Justice for Jessica. The arrest of Harold Peterson on August 20, 1997, marked the end of one of New Hampshire's most heartbreaking missing person cases. Peterson's confession provided complete answers about Jessica Martinez's fate and exposed the calculated nature of a crime that had been motivated by revenge and hatred. Detective Mitchell worked with prosecutors to ensure that all evidence was properly documented and that Peterson's confession was corroborated by physical evidence from the crime scene. The case against Peterson was built on a foundation of forensic evidence, witness testimony, and his own detailed admission of guilt. The investigation revealed that Peterson had planned Jessica's murder for months after being fired from Camp Wildwood. He had used his knowledge of the local forest and abandoned logging sites to select the perfect location for concealing his crime, believing that the remote cabin would ensure that evidence was never discovered. Peterson's confession also revealed that he had been stalking the camp for weeks before attacking Jessica, learning the staff's routines and waiting for an opportunity to strike. His detailed knowledge of camp operations had allowed him to approach Jessica without arousing immediate suspicion. The forensic evidence from the abandoned cabin supported every aspect of Peterson's confession. Hair, fiber, and DNA evidence confirmed that both Jessica and Peterson had been at the location, and the condition of Jessica's remains was consistent with the timeline and circumstances described in his statement. For Sarah Thompson, whose discovery had finally solved the case, the resolution was bittersweet. She had provided closure for Jessica's family and the camp community, but she had also had to confront the tragic reality that her beloved counselor had been murdered by someone who had worked at the camp. Sarah's role in solving the case was widely recognized and praised by law enforcement and the Martinez family. Her knowledge of local history and her determination to explore forgotten places had been crucial to finally uncovering evidence that professional searchers had been unable to find. The Martinez family expressed profound gratitude to Sarah for her discovery and for never forgetting Jessica during the 4 years since her disappearance. Roberto and Carmen Martinez traveled from California to New Hampshire to thank Sarah personally and to see the location where their daughter's remains had been found. Harold Peterson was charged with first-degree murder and kidnapping in Jessica's death. The evidence against him was overwhelming, and his detailed confession left no doubt about his guilt. Peterson pleaded guilty to avoid the death penalty and was sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole. During the sentencing hearing, Jessica's family and friends were given the opportunity to address Peterson directly about the impact of his crime. Jessica's parents spoke about the 4 years of uncertainty and grief they had endured, and former campers testified about how Jessica's murder had affected their lives. Camp Wildwood, which had struggled to maintain operations since Jessica's disappearance, was able to achieve some measure of closure with the resolution of her case. The camp implemented additional security measures and established a memorial program in Jessica's honor. The case had a significant impact on summer camp safety protocols throughout New England and beyond. The investigation revealed vulnerabilities in background checking procedures and highlighted the importance of thoroughly vetting all employees who worked with children. The abandoned logging cabin where Jessica's body had been found was permanently sealed by authorities to prevent it from becoming a site for curiosity seekers or others who might disturb what had become a crime scene of historical significance. Detective Mitchell, who retired shortly after Peterson's conviction, considered Jessica's case one of the most important of her career. The successful resolution demonstrated the value of never giving up on missing person cases and the importance of community involvement in solving crimes. The case also highlighted the role that historical research and exploration could play in criminal investigations. Sarah Thompson's interest in local logging history had led her to discover evidence that might never have been found through conventional search methods. Jessica's story became part of training programs for law enforcement officers dealing with missing person cases in remote areas. The investigation demonstrated the importance of considering all possible locations and the value of local knowledge in understanding where evidence might be concealed. The Martinez family established a scholarship fund in Jessica's name at the University of Vermont, providing support for students studying elementary education. The scholarship ensured that Jessica's dream of becoming a teacher would live on through other young people pursuing the same career. The Camp Wildwood community created a memorial garden in Jessica's honor, featuring her favorite flowers and a plaque commemorating her dedication to children and her love of the outdoors. The garden served as a place for reflection and remembrance for all who had known and loved Jessica. The silver bracelet that had led to the breakthrough in Jessica's case was returned to her family, who treasured it as a tangible connection to their daughter. The bracelet had waited 4 years beneath the floorboards of an abandoned cabin to tell its story and bring justice for Jessica. Harold Peterson remained in prison, where he would spend the rest of his life paying for his crime against an innocent young woman who had dedicated her life to caring for children. His arrest had removed a dangerous predator from society and ensured that he could never harm anyone else. The resolution of Jessica Martinez's case brought closure to one of New Hampshire's most tragic missing person investigations, but it also served as a reminder of the importance of vigilance in protecting those who work with children and the value of never giving up the search for truth and justice. Final words. The resolution of Jessica Martinez's case in 1997 brought closure to one of New Hampshire's most tragic missing person investigations. The discovery of her bracelet in an abandoned logging cabin had finally provided answers to questions that had haunted her family and the camp community for 4 years. Jessica's story led to significant improvements in summer camp safety protocols and background checking procedures throughout New England and beyond. The case demonstrated how individuals with criminal intentions could exploit their knowledge of camp operations and remote locations to commit and conceal crimes. The Martinez family's advocacy work following the resolution of Jessica's case helped improve missing person investigation techniques and safety education programs for summer camps. They worked tirelessly to ensure that other families would not experience the uncertainty and suffering that had defined their lives for years. Sarah Thompson continued her interest in local history and archaeology, eventually pursuing a career in historical preservation. Her discovery of Jessica's bracelet had demonstrated the value of historical research and exploration in solving criminal cases and had inspired her to help preserve important sites throughout New England. Camp Wildwood implemented comprehensive safety improvements and became a model for camp security throughout the region. The camp's commitment to child safety honored Jessica's memory while ensuring that similar tragedies could be prevented in the future. Today, Jessica Martinez's legacy lives on through the scholarship program established in her name and the safety improvements that resulted from her case. Her story serves as a reminder that the search for missing persons must be thorough and persistent, and that answers can sometimes be found in the most unexpected places. The abandoned logging cabin that had concealed Jessica's fate for 4 years had finally given up its secrets through the curiosity and determination of a former camper who had never forgotten her beloved counselor. Jessica's case demonstrated that justice can prevail even when perpetrators believe they have successfully hidden their crimes in forgotten places. Harold Peterson's conviction brought justice for Jessica while ensuring that a dangerous predator could never again harm those who work with children. The case showed how individuals with access to remote locations and knowledge of institutional operations could exploit these advantages for criminal purposes. The silver bracelet that had been hidden beneath the cabin's floorboards had preserved crucial evidence for 4 years, waiting for someone with the right combination of knowledge and determination to discover it. Jessica's case became a testament to the importance of never giving up hope and the power of community members to contribute to solving even the most challenging investigations. The White Mountain forests of New Hampshire had kept Jessica's secret for 4 years, but ultimately they had revealed the truth through the persistent efforts of investigators and the dedication of a young woman who refused to let her counselor be forgotten. Jessica Martinez had finally come home, and her killer had been brought to justice.